this time we are going to talk about the contemporary period. So the contemporary period is after the post-war literature. And then after that, we're going to proceed to the 21st century literature. Okay, so we gain our independence on July 4th, 1946, with the Philippines regained its freedom and the Filipino flag waved joyously alone. The chains were broken. This is when the time when the Americans returned to the Philippines. Writers during that time have regained their freedom from writing. Okay, thank you so much. So the state of literature during this period is what we call the struggle of mind and spirit. They were actually making literature about what are the things that they have experienced during the war, emancipation from the enemy, and the wild desire to see print. During the time of the Japanese, they discouraged the use of English. So during this time, they have like the desire to see the print. So they have the desire to read the newspaper. Diba? Freedom of the press was not allowed during the Japanese period. So when we say they have the desire, they wanted to actually see the newspaper and have the freedom to actually express themselves through the print media. So these are the literature, noted literature during that time. So the heart of the islands, they started to actually write several poems during this time. And then we have number two. So during that time, they started to write prose. So they didn't just only write prose, but they also write poetry. And then we have prose and poem for number three, Philippine writing, Nick Joaquin. So just take note of the notable writers during this time. So we have Manuel Viray, Maximo Ramos, Nick Joaquin, T. de Agkawili, Amador, Daguio, Philippine Harvest, Horizons Least. So Horizons Least is a collection of works by the professors of University of the East. So a collection of works by the professors of UE, that means University of the East, mostly in English. Short stories, essays, research papers, poems, and drama by Artemio Pataksil and Silverio Baltazar. So as you can see, class, usually no, ang ginahimo nila nga mga they were writing a lot of short stories and prose and poetry, but then usually in volume because it's a collection. The themes of most poems dealt with the usual love of nature, social, political problems. So usually when they write literature during that time, they are writing because they wanted to evoke, and then they wanted people to change. They wanted like the society to change. Okay, who spoke of courage in his sleep by NVM Gonzalez? Speak not, speak also by Conrado V. Pedroque, and other poets were Toribia Manu and Edith El Tiempo. Jose Garcia Villas have come here, won acclaim both and here and abroad. Okay, so let's proceed to new Filipino literature during this period. Also during this time, nga nag-revive ang Filipino literature. And most of the things that their writings are the things that they have experienced during the time of the Japanese period. The writings that were dealing that they usually write were like poverty, unsay mga experience nila during the war, and also brave guerrilla exploits. Okay, so we have period of activism 1970 to 1972. Okay, so the youth during that time, they were writing about the changes that they have seen in the government. They were writing about nationalism, how to become a good citizen of the country. Young people can also be like 8, 19, 20, or like early 20s. Those are also young people, so they become an activist, and they are asking for a change in the government. The literary revolution, so the youth become completely rebellious during this period. They nagrebelde sila no sa government. And nga no makabalota, it's because they have a lot of demonstration during that time. They held pens and wrote on placards in red paint the equivalent of the word makibaka. Makibaka, wag matakot. This is what they're doing to show that they really want changes in the government. Writing during the period of activism. Palanca Awardees for Literature in English. So this award was founded by Carlos Palanca Sr. So for example, if your literature is really good, so they're actually giving cash prizes for short story, poetry, one act play. There's a set of criteria that you need to follow para maapil ka sa Palanca Awards for Literature. Okay, period of the New Society. This was 1972 to 1980. So they started to have like these kind of writings that deal with the progress of the country, like Korean Revolution, family planning. So this New Society tried to stop pornography or those kind of or any forms of writing that is like really bad for the people and really bad for the Philippines. They tried to stop that one. This was in the period of New Society. So a lot of writings during this time were proper nutrition, environment, drug addiction, and pollution. During that time, the period of New Society, they try to like really revolutionize the society that we live in. They try to stop the bad writings, those writings that has bad influences for the youth. Okay. Filipino society during the period of the New Society. Themes of most poems dealt with patience, regard for native culture, customs, and the beauties of nature and surrounding. Di ba usually pag class ka ng, I think we are still having this kind of new society because most poems that we have right now are some poems are dealing with native culture, diba? Native culture, and saan pag-preserve sa culture that we have. And a lot of debates right now I can see is like they talk about how are we going to be like a good Filipino, good citizen of the country. There are also plays written during this time were the Sinaculo, Tagalog Zarzuela, the Sinaculo for the Christians, right? And Imbayok, and which were presented in the rebuilt Metropolitan Theater in the Folk Arts Theater at the Cultural Center of the Philippines. So during this time, we already have a cultural center where a lot of the presentations that we have, plays, dance, were actually presented at the Cultural Center of the Philippines. So let's proceed to radio and television. The radio continued to be patronized during this period. The play series like Si Matar, Dahlia, Ito Ang Palad Ko, Mr. Lonely were the forms of recreation of those without television. Okay, so those were Filipino films, okay? Siyempre, kay Film Festival God, those were Filipino films. So, di ba, sa Maynila, sa Kuko ng Liwanag, so pangutan na rin yung parents class kung nakakita sila ani mga film. I think nakakita sila ani. Kay, di ba, sa una, uso pa kayo ang sine. Karon kay movies naman ang kuan. Even if you don't want to go to the theater, you can just download sa internet. Diba kaninga mga films. For example, like Aguila, led by Fernando Poe Jr. in Siang. Ganito kami noon, paano kayo ngayon? Led by Christopher De Leon and Gloria Diaz. Minsa isang gamo-gamo, Nora Honor. And then Manila, sa Kuko ng mga liwanag. So those were the kind of topics that were favored by people instead of sensationalizing reporting of killings, rape, and robberies. Literature during the society, we have bilingual education. So bilingual, from the word to, bi means two, lingual means language, so two language. So bilingual education was initiated by the National Board of National Education as early as 1958, continued up to the period of martial rule, and even right now, di ba? Di ba naka-remember mo class kanang grades 1 to 3, kinahanglan magbisaya gyud no. Dayon, aside sa Bisaya, we are also learning English. So those are what we call bilingual education. Two language were used in the curriculum. So two kinds or two languages. So dili lang, di ba when teachers are explaining, we're not only just explaining English straight jud na tanan, 'di ba? Dili lang. 'Di ba we're also talking in Filipino, and we're also talking in Bisaya, 'di ba? Because that is what we call bilingual education. So that is the period of the martial law and resulted in the deterioration of English in different levels of education. What do you think will happen kung maanad ka og Bisaya then dili na ka makasigig in English? Ano na mahitabo? What will happen? What will happen if sige kag Bisaya ba? What do you think will happen? And then you won't be able to use English anymore. Learning a second language is good, especially if it's English, because English is like the international language, and you can actually use English when you go abroad, when you go outside of the country. We are not going to be fluent enough to speak English to other people if dili ta magsige og practice. So that's why if you're learning a second language, especially English class, you need to practice all the time. Practice is the key here. So if you want to be fluent in English class, if you want to be fluent, for example, if you want to be fluent, di ba usually we have our inner voice. Syempre naman yung inner voice, like for example, kani ka akong suoton no, ay dili ni bati ni ay kana ana. Those are what we call inner voice. So dapat ang ato yung inner voice, instead of saying in Visayan language or our own tongue, you would say it in English. So every time you think in English. For example, if you are choosing a dress to wear this morning, then you can say, what am I gonna wear today? Maybe I should wear this black dress, or maybe this blue one, but this blue one looks really cool, things like that. After graduating in college, naginay interview, and usually mga interviews class, they were all in English. So it's it's a good way for you to get the job that you always wanted. So it's really better if you know how to communicate effectively, especially if you know how to speak English. So that is if you want to be fluent in English. But period of the Third Republic. Okay. So mo to siya no, period of the Third Republic. Filipino poetry. It was during this time nga gi-criticize na nila ang government. Common theme were true to life, grief, poverty, aspirations for freedom, love of God, country, and fellow men. Murag sa time pod sa mga, pareha sa mga time sa Japanese, di ba? They're also making poems about the love of the nation, love of the country, love of the Philippines. We have periods from 1986 to 1999. Kaya nga no, class, after ani is we're gonna talk about the 21st na ta. Kay 21st literatures are those literature that was published in the year 2000 onwards. So from 2001, 2000 to 2020. Diba? Like, like The Fault in Our Stars, mga novels, mga inana. Okay. History took another twist. Once more, the Filipino people regained independence, which lost 20 years ago. The span of 4 days, the so-called people power prevailed. Together, the people barricaded the streets, petitioning the government for changes and reforms. Okay, next. When it comes to newspapers and other publications, newspapers, which were once branded crony newspapers, became instant opposition paper overnight. This was true on Bulletin Today, which became the opposition paper.